At the Kuyper Center for Christian Studies in Buenos Aires, we often use the word worldview. In this presentation, I provide an overview of the concept. Let's start by analyzing the word worldview. This will function as an introduction to the concept. After that, I will explain how a worldview works. First, the term worldview comes from the German word Weltanschauung, meaning world or vision or perspective. Originally, the German word meant the sensory perception of the world. Later, it referred to alternative perspectives of reality to the Christian account. There are three aspects of the term to consider. Someone is looking at the world. Consider the implied verb look or observe. This does not simply mean the neurological process by which the brain receives impassive data. No, I refer to how our mind evaluates what we see. We evaluate what we look at. We interpret it with the criteria that culture teaches. So seeing implies judging. If you think this is too abstract, notice how men turn their heads when they see an attractive woman. Or think about how a thief stares at something valuable. When we consider the concept of worldview, we must recognize the interpretive and evaluative function that we bring to the task. The concept worldview implies an evaluation of the world we observe. The important questions are, is our assessment accurate or true? Do we perceive reality or not? So seeing is a complex activity that involves intellectual, cultural, and moral aspects when we evaluate what we see. No one evaluates the world objectively. We all have prejudices. Second, think about the word world. What is it? Is it just a super complex mixture of matter and energy that simply exists in the universe? Is the world only physical, or does it include a sociological dimension? Is the world simply a thing or a habitat? If the world is a habitat, then a synonym for world is civilization. If so, how should we interpret this civilization? There is life on this object we call the world. How should we evaluate this life and death? And speaking of life, what is it? Is life experienced only in time and space? Could there be another dimension, something invisible, spiritual, or eternal? And does the world we see and interpret exist within a mixture of overlapping visible and invisible realities? Finally, think about who is looking at the world and who is evaluating. Obviously, if you're an atheist, you see the world differently than a religious person. If you are a Marxist, you evaluate the world differently than a capitalist. If you are a person of color, then you often evaluate the world with different priorities than white people. The poor also see reality in a unique way, as does a population gay. This raises several theological questions. Who has the authority and wisdom to evaluate the world? Do human beings have the ability to evaluate reality, or does God? Does sin affect the way we evaluate the world? Should biblical revelation impact how we interpret reality? Does the biblical God qualify for this task, or the deities of other religions? Or does atheism or naturalism have a better perspective? Hopefully, you recognize that the concept of worldview is very complicated. It is complex because the way we look at the world is determined by the criteria we have received from our families, societies, philosophies, and religions. But not only these, our economic status, gender, race, and level of education often influence how we think about worldview and meaning. No one is free from such prejudices in worldview. When we consider what a worldview is, we use our pre-existing worldviews. We interpret worldview with our worldview. To illustrate, Would a Hindu interpret the world in the same way as a Muslim? Would an atheist interpret the world in the same way as a Christian? Would a relativist interpret the world in the same way as a person who affirms the Bible? In addition, worldview is very polemical. In this world, worldview involves a very real struggle for power and influence, especially when worldview is embodied with ideology and public policy. Our world is a battlefield, and every worldview seeks followers. So worldviews have power and struggle to dominate. The saying, ideas have consequences, is very true with regard to worldviews. Therefore, we can say metaphorically that worldviews are like a super difficult puzzle. I will illustrate the importance of worldview with two diagrams. Again, the critical question of worldview is, who is looking at the world? Who is evaluating? And who should or can? Throughout its use in history, the term worldview has been a picture of or pictures of reality from the perspective of human beings, sinners, as if God did not matter by definition. Or worldview imagines reality with another kind of God or religion. But according to the Bible, there is only one view that is true, and that is God's. Worldviews often substitute the biblical God for other gods, or imagine reality without gods at all, such as atheism and naturalism. The biblical worldview tells us, therefore, change your perspective. So there are two problems with the concept of worldview historically. They use the wrong perspective, man instead of God. They substitute the Bible for other forms of religion and revelation. And from this point of view, the Bible is not or does not have a worldview. But the word is common today, and we can still use it if we're careful. In fact, we can use the word if we presume God's worldview or the Creator's worldview. Now, with this introduction, let's consider how worldviews work. As we have seen, they function as counterfeit religions and alternative gospels. I have 7 points to tell you about. First, a worldview is a philosophy of life, an intellectual grid or interpretive framework, ultimate priorities and unquestionable beliefs, as well as a guide to living, both in ethics and in social relationships. James Sire said, "A worldview is a commitment, a fundamental orientation of the heart that can be expressed as a story or as a set of presuppositions, assumptions that can be true, partially true, or completely false, that we hold consciously or unconsciously, consistently or inconsistently about the basic composition of our world." Second, worldviews order reality. They explain, for example, good and evil, how to use our time, who to love and how, what to believe. They tell us our identity. They teach us how to spend money. They show us who is acceptable and unacceptable groups. And they explain the purpose in life. Third, James Sire explains that worldviews answer intellectual questions such as, what is reality? What exists? What is a human being? How can I know the reality? How do I know the truth? Does truth exist? How should I live? What is good? What is evil? How can people live in peace and flourish? Why is there evil and suffering? Is there a solution? Is redemption experienced only in this life or the next, or both? Does the supernatural exist? Is there a God? And if so, what is he like? 4, worldviews have a chronological or temporal dimension. Ted Turneau provides these features of a worldview dedicated to answering questions about history or meaning through time. regarding the beginning or past. Where do we come from? How did we get here? From a biblical perspective, this is the question of creation or cosmology. Present, where are we now? And what am I doing here? These questions have to do with anthropology, ethics, and sociology. And future, what is our purpose? Where are we going? These questions concern history and time, as well as the idea of progress and eternity. Fifth, worldviews also answer a very existential question. What sustains human life? What allows us to exist at all, and why? As I mentioned before, a naturalist or atheist could answer these questions in terms of evolution, with the denial of an afterlife or a divine creator. However, if you have young children, you may have seen a recent version of the movie Cinderella. There's a very interesting dialogue between Cinderella and her mother that expresses an important worldview question. Who takes care of us? Mother: oh yes, I think the animals listen to us and talk to us, if only we have the ear for that. This is how we learn to take care of them. Cinderella: who takes care of us? Mother: fairy godmothers, of course. Cinderella: and do you believe in them? Mother: I believe in everything. Cinderella: so I also believe in everything. Sixth, worldviews function as religions because they are other gospels and stories that act as revelation, telling us what is real and how to respond. Worldviews function as religions because they orient humans existentially and provide clarity. Remember, worldviews explain right and wrong and the purpose of life. They are prescriptive and provide guidance. Worldviews tell us how to use our time and money. They declare what is true and what is false. Worldviews teach what is believable and unbelievable. They inform us whether groups are acceptable or not. They provide heroes to worship and causes to die for. Worldviews produce martyrs and saints. They reveal what is worth dying for and how to flourish in this life. So worldviews function as religion. They structure life and meaning. They tell us how to live in the world and how to interpret and respond to the world around us. In other words, worldviews tell us what reality is and how to respond, which is the function of religion, philosophy, and of course, worldview. Now, there are three types of religions and worldviews. There are explicit religions such as Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism. There are secular religions, political ideologies such as Nazism, communism, North Korean Hukkeism. And then there are implicit religions such as consumerism, sports fanaticism, and nationalisms, which function as religion, providing meaning and social and ethical cohesion. I will now give you several examples of worldviews, ancient and modern. First, an explicit religion in the Bible, Pax Romana. The most important factor that allowed Rome to establish its empire and implement Pax Romana, or the Peace of Rome, was the imperial cult. The cult of Caesar provided the ideological connection that held together the social, economic, cultural, and religious pieces through the adhesive image and ritual. Neil Elliott pointed out the ways in which Rome captured the obedience and imagination of its people. On the ideological plane, through imperial worship and ceremony, the rhetoric of the courts, and in an educational system that declared the naturalness of Rome's global dominance. According to the Roman worldview, with the help of the gods, Caesar brought peace, order, and salvation to the earth. A new eschatological age was created by the gods, all coming out of Rome. For this reason, the proclamation that Jesus Christ is Lord, rather than Caesar, was not acceptable among those who embraced the worldview of Pax Romana. Another great challenge between the Roman and Christian worldviews was the redefinition of words that we had in common, such as good news, righteousness, salvation, and cross. They use the same terms, but with contrasting worldview assumptions. Secondly, a secular religion, North Korean Hukkaism. Through a personality cult and centrally controlled propaganda, the nation's founder, Kim Il-sung, was deified as the great leader. He became the protector and provider of the nation. And like the Caesars before him, time was rearranged in his image. His birth began the year and replaced Christmas. Kim Il-sung was known as the leader who opened paradise and the being whom children thank for their food. However, theologian Albert Mohler commented, when a political regime denies any transcendent supernatural reality, it deifies itself. Another secular religion, scientific naturalism, which says nothing exists except material reality. There are no non-physical realities like God or the soul. The world is a closed natural system. There is no God outside. There are no divine interventions. There can be no miracles. Therefore, it is irrational and futile to speak of God or the supernatural. They are illusions. Believing in them is a sign of mental illness. An explicit religion, New Age spirituality. Nothing exists except the spiritual. We are gods, and we share the same ultimate reality with all that exists. Look for the God within. Salvation comes from realizing that naturalism is false and discovering the higher self that unifies everything, which is enlightenment. There is no truth or true religion. These are false divisions. Instead, each person should use any knowledge of any spirituality and combine it as he pleases. And finally, on an implicit religion, consumerism. Douglas Rushkoff wrote about consumerism as a worldview. The purpose of life is to buy and sell things, or even ideas. But like any compulsive behavior, our buying and selling simply stimulates the need to buy or sell more. There's always a better house, computer, or school district. If only we could make enough money to go to the next level. We are what we buy, and we can always buy better. And the more we buy, the more we find the development of coercive techniques that forces us to buy even more. And seventh, worldviews come in, as we say, three sizes. First, there are macro, and these are intellectual systems, like religions and philosophies, naturalism, existentialism, for example. These are the abstract isms that we learn formally in the university. But most of us don't think abstractly and philosophically. So I'll explain two other dimensions of worldview. Micro, or lived worldviews, consisting of core paradigms and values we use to define ourselves, such as individualism, personal autonomy, moral relativism, postmodern tribalism, nationalism, gender ideologies, myth of progress, and the Hollywood myth of romantic love as a path to personal fulfillment and identity. And then there are mini worldviews. These are individual stories that define personal identity. Think of mini worldviews like eating in a cafeteria. We select the flavor we want and combine the foods that we like. Too often today, we do the same thing when we construct our personal identities and favorite worldviews. As John Calvin said, each of us is an idol factory. In this sense, everyone has their own personally designed worldview. I want to spend a few moments on this feature, that is, mini worldviews, because that's how most of us experience worldview without thinking about it. So let's return to the subject of consumerism. We hear about worldviews most often in marketing slogans, such as Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. The message is that human beings are made to have fun, and they experience their true identity in consumption. Think of another Disney theme. Someday, my prince will come. Just listen to the lyrics of their music and you will understand the Disney delusion. Or Nike, just do it. Don't listen to anyone. Listen only to yourself and act accordingly. You take the initiative and impose your will on others. Or Uber, move however you want. Again, the issue of self-expression is critical in popular culture, which emphasizes personal autonomy. And Gatorade, is it in you? Gatorade asks us to release our inner greatness. Benjamin Barber calls this dynamic Macworld, which is the globalization of consumerism. Macworld, he says, is an empire, a true colonization of tastes, images, brands, and lifestyles, inspired by the spirit of McDonald's fast food and what has been called the Disney delusion, or in fact, the Disney worldview. Barber writes, Macworld is an entertainment shopping experience that brings together shopping malls, multiplexes, theme parks, sports arenas for spectators, fast food chains with their endless links to movies, and television shopping networks into a single large enterprise in the way of maximizing profits. Now listen to this, transforms the human being. In other words, consumerism, which is an implicit religion or worldview, tells us in effect, I shop, therefore I am. Shopping is the path to self-discovery and our own personal brand. A worldview provided by consumerism is an idol and a self-deceptive identity. To get a good idea of what popular culture teaches us, watch Disney's Soul and Strange World. Another very interesting movie is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. These are great movies for discussions about worldview and the Bible. So as you might suspect, changing worldviews doesn't happen easily. Worldviews involve intellectual, emotional, ethical, sexual, economic, social, and religious commitments at the deepest level of our being. Worldviews are the glue that holds our world together. They make sense of things. They are not easily or quickly abandoned. For a New Testament example of what can happen when worldviews are questioned, read Acts 19, when Paul preached in Ephesus. In Acts 17:6, unbelievers describe Paul's ministry this way: they have turned the world upside down. That's a useful description of worldview transitions, individually and culturally. In fact, converting to the biblical worldview is a miracle, something the Spirit does for us. Let me provide an example of a former student in Prague who was experiencing the cultural and personal tension associated with a transition away from communist ideology. Perhaps you can hear her despair and confusion. Karl Marx was almost my godfather. He wouldn't let me read all these dangerous Western books. I could watch on TV only nice children's stories, not like today, when children see American garbage, killing, fighting, having sex. We didn't have to be afraid of AIDS and drugs. We knew who the idol was and what the ideal was. We were happy. Where should I look for an ideal today? Definitely not in the West, not in the East. Maybe I'll look for it among the stars. Now, if you know the Bible well, or if you understand a little theology, you understand that we have been talking about the theology of religions, in particular the concept of idolatry. And so we have reached the end, and it is time for a brief review and a small examination. But unlike the normal educational procedure, we will first have an exam, then the review. You'll understand why in a moment. I have 3 questions in this short quiz. First, what is the most important commandment in the Bible according to Jesus? When Jesus was asked about this, he responded, "The most important is, listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength." Mark 12, 29, 30. And here's the second question. From where in the Old Testament did Jesus quote this statement? Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 5. "Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." And the third question is, what is the name of this Old Testament statement? The Shema. Now remember this as we have a brief review and finish. First, every worldview aims to tell us what is real and how we should respond, what is often called the indicative imperative dynamic, which is there's an indicative statement or affirmation, declaration, or manifesto, a explicit or implicit therefore, followed by an imperative, a demand, an application, an obligation, which says what we should do about it based upon what it is, what is real. So now, what is the indicative statement of the Bible? The one truth that is more important, the statement of ultimate reality with which we must reckon. As we have just learned, the answer is the Shema. Indicative. Listen, Israel, the Lord our God is the only Lord. And what will be the response of every human being created in the image of God? The imperative. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. This, in fact, defines holistic biblical spirituality. And finally, what does this reveal about all other worldviews? All other worldviews that replace one or both the indicative statement of reality and the imperative response of the Shema are idolatries. Finally, there is a sad truth. Even in the church, most people never think about worldview or their core beliefs. Generally, they are passive consumers of popular culture and its macro, micro, and mini worldviews. Often, we have lost our prophetic role and neglected our creative and mental abilities to influence the culture for the glory of God. Many suffer from biblical ignorance, anti-intellectualism, and unreflective distraction. Here in the Kuyper Center for Christian Studies, however, we have decided enough with ignorance and enough with anti-intellectualism. And if you're interested, help us in Buenos Aires as we teach the biblical worldview and how to love God with the mind.